Welcome to the Writer Reads Chronicles of a Dark God, Book 2, Dark God's Rise, Chapter 19, Unexpected Allies. Raomar watched the villagers follow the Lady Calhadria along the ridge, then focused on the forester. Falcon, was it? The man looked too sharp for his liking, even though he was looking toward the tree behind which Goodwill had vanished. Raomar stifled an amused snort, feeling the Northman slither to the ground beside him. Grunwald said nothing. He didn't even glance at his friend, although Raomar was sure he caught a glint of amber in the barbarian's eyes. Like that, is it? He thought, not daring to move. Even if the forester was sure the barbarian was the only one in the area, Raomar was pretty sure the man could work out which sounds came from another source, and he didn't want to complicate matters. He watched as Grumwald rose into a crouch and moved swiftly and silently toward the forester's back. As the barbarian turned his stalk into a leap, the forester spun to face him. His hunting knife cleared its scabbard faster than Raomar gave him credit for, and he tensed. He relaxed as the forester took a step back, only to tense when the man dropped into a fighting stance. I told my lady you might help, he said, and Grumwell laughed. It was the same low laugh he gave at the start of every serious fight. Raomar watched as his friend landed short of his target, unlimbering his axe. By the gods, we don't have time for this, Raomar swore, shaking Alessia's cautioning grasp from his arm. Master, Ghost laid a hand on his other arm. I'll need to stop this, he told the girl, then glanced at the wizardess. You know this, mouse. Alessia nodded and released him, letting him move cautiously to the bush's edge, then following him. He arrived in time to see the forester's bare-toothed grin and recognized it for the fighting grin it was. Grunwald's expression bore something similar as the pair circled each other. Raomar approached, careful to keep from drawing either man's attention. Grunwald's axe flashed and the forester stepped under and around it, knives flashing in return. Another swing and another rippling flash of light on steel followed. Grunwald fainted inward in a stroke Raomar had seen him make many times before. The forester's smile faded to thin-lipped concentration. He stepped under the swing, redirecting it with a double-bladed maneuver that resulted in Grumwald's face losing all expression. Shifting swiftly to take advantage of their concentration, Raomar waited until the twisting weave of blades brought the forester's back to face him. As soon as he had the advantage, he propelled himself out of the bushes, ramming his shoulder into the center of Falcon's back. He wrapped his arms around the man's torso, trapping the man's hands to his side and driving him to the ground. Grumwald pulled his next strike, roaring in frustration, but Raomar couldn't afford to pay his friend any attention. Falcon hadn't relinquished his grip on the blades, and he was doing his best to twist free. The man turned beneath him, and Raomar found himself trying to recapture Falcon's hands, and then trying to force his blades away from his face, his throat, and his chest. It took him several seconds to disarm the man of one blade and then pin the other to the ground. As soon as he did, Falcon stilled, his eyes coming to rest on Raomar's face. It took Raomar a moment to recognize the fear creeping through the man's expression, then a moment longer to remember why it was there. He curled his lip, acknowledging the signs of an older hate, and Falcon tensed. Now look what you did, Grumwald said, leaning over Raomar's shoulder. You're scaring him. I'm not the one who attacked him with a battle axe, Raomar retorted. Grunwald snorted. All the same, he's more scared of you than he is of me. Raomar felt the forest testing his hold and looked into the man's eyes. Don't, he said. Instead of the acquiescence he expected, his instruction brought renewed struggle, and it wasn't until Grunwald plucked Raomar from the forester's chest and pinned the man to the ground that the struggle ceased. And even then the man's eyes darted from the Northman holding him down to the slender, sharp-featured elf hovering just behind him. You have him? Raomar asked, and the forester renewed his struggles. Grunwald gave a disgusted grunt. I did, he grumbled, taking one of the man's knives and tossing it to the edge of the bushes, then grappling him for the other. He secured the man's wrist. Let go of the knife, he ordered, and Falcon's frightened eyes sought his face. Raomar moved further away, gathering sticks and twigs for a fire. I said, Grunwald began, and, whoops, and Falcon opened his hand. Grunwald carefully took the weapon and tossed it after the first. Hey! Falcon protested and subsided as Grunwald met his gaze. The man gulped and his eyes flickered toward Raomar before returning to the barbarian's face. You said you would not harm us, he whispered, jerking his chin toward the Kavarag priest. But it's a beast elf. Raomar snapped his head toward the man. I'm what? Raomar asked, taking another step toward the man. Whoops. I'm what? Raomar asked, taking a step toward the man and watching his face go a shade paler. Grunwald scowled at him, and Falcon tensed as though preparing to resume his struggles should Raomar get any closer. He only returned his attention to the barbarian when Grunwald spoke. I said he would not harm you, the Northman said quietly, and the mage told you I spoke the truth. He gestured toward Raomar. That is a new made priest of Staravan. I'll believe that when I see a sign from the god himself, Falcon snarled, struggling anew as Raomar stalked over to crouch beside him. Grunwald stilled his struggles with a slap, then slapped him again when he twisted his head, searching for his knife. The forester only stilled when Grunwald leaned his forearm across the man's upper chest and pushed. After that, only the frightened movement of the forester's eyes showed his focus on their surroundings, even if most of that focus was set on Raomar. Raomar watched the forester's eyes widen as he lifted his hand. He saw them track the movement of his hand into his tunic and then out again, with the long leather thong tweaked between his fingers. Sweat beaded across the man's forehead, but he didn't move. He watched, white-faced, as the Kavarag drew the thong clear of his tunic to dangle the symbol of Staravan's balance in front of his face. The symbol winked in the sunlight before gleaming softly with the power of the god. Peace flowed between them, and Falcon slumped back on the grass. Ah, Holy Lord, forgive me, he whispered, closing his eyes. I've attacked a servant of yours. You didn't attack me, Raomar corrected softly. Don't you remember? He waited, letting puzzlement replace the fear on Falcon's face before explaining. It was I who attacked you. The forester relaxed a little more, and Grunwald chose that moment to release him. As the barbarian moved off him and stepped away, Falcon rolled slowly to his knees and looked up at Raomar. I would have killed you, he admitted, keeping his hands on his knees. He jerked his chin toward Raomar. Because you are mottle-skinned and an elf. He drew a breath and let it out slowly. And yet you are a priest of the very god I serve. Raomar crouched before him. It was I who provoked you, he reminded the man, reaching out to lay a hand on the forester's shoulder. He sighed when the man flinched away, letting his hand fall short and resting his knuckles on the ground instead. I would consider it a great favor if you would let me bestow Staravan's blessing upon you, he said. It would ease the last of the doubts from your mind, as well as serving you well on the work that lies before us. I'm sorry, Falcon answered, and held still as Raomar raised his hand to lay it on his shoulder once more. It's just that you've met my kind before, Raomar finished for him, making it a question as he set his hand in place. I have, Falcon replied, and Raomar felt a tremor ripple through the man as he strove not to pull away. Raomar waited, resisting the urge to pull his hand away when a second set of memories surfaced and made the man shudder. I should have forgotten long ago, he whispered in a hoarse half-apology. But yes, I've met your people before. Raomar dipped his chin in acknowledgement, then began the soft chant that would impart Staravan's blessing. He ignored the man's next shiver of fear and focused on calling the god's blessing. He found it difficult not to smile when the man relaxed beneath his touch. As the prayer drew to a close, he went to lift his hand away and was surprised to find that Falcon had covered it with his own. In truth, you do serve Staravan, he said, squeezing Raomar's hand once before releasing it. They rose together, turning to where Raomar had left the firewood. Ghost appeared from round one of the nearest trees as they did, her arms full of slightly larger branches that she dropped beside the pile of twigs. Is it enough, master? She asked, and the forester turned a puzzled stare to the Kavarag. Master? He asked, crouching beside the woodpile and gathering it together. Since when do Staravan's priests take on apprentices? Since they were formerly thieves and priests of Enshul and had accepted apprentices prior to being cast out just before their exchange? Falcon paused in the midst of turning to carry the wood further from the ridge's edge. You served Enshul? Raomar gathered the last of the wood and glanced at Ghost. Bring more, he ordered, and bring the others out to camp. The child nodded, sunlight catching her face as she turned to go. Also yours? Falcon asked, and Raomar shook his head. An orphan, he explained, and not fully Kavarag, but White Mountains too. I've encountered them as well. Falcon gave a soft whistle and wove his way through the bushes, leading them to a clearing between several large outcrops. He pivoted to take in the clearing, then nodded in satisfaction and knelt to build a fire. Raomar knelt beside him, setting his bundle of firewood on the ground. I served Enshul, he said, belatedly answering the forester's earlier question. She took me in when I fled my lands and wanted to serve no other. He touched one of the sapphire streaks in his hair. This was the first sign of her approval, he said, feeling a soft pang of grief. Instead of giving voice to it, he touched another of the streaks. And this was the last. The forester's hand stilled, and he turned his head. She cast you out? He asked. Raomar dipped his head. She did, he replied, passing Falcon a handful of twigs and watching as he added them to the fire. And she did not explain what I'd done wrong. Wrong? Falcon demanded, snapping a twig with more savagery than required. What could you have done that would not have precluded you from service to Staravan? That's just it, Raomar explained. I hadn't done anything. It's because of who I am and what I have done that Staravan demanded me. He ducked his head, his face heating with embarrassment at his goddess's pettiness. She did not like losing one she'd favored, he admitted. They were silent for a long moment, Raomar continuing to pass fuel for Falcon's fire. It was the soft rustle of Ghost's return, followed by the firmer crunch of Grunwald's step, that made them both look around. We have to rescue the assassin's daughter, the Northman said.